The Galactic Academy floated in space above a planet called Kepler 442b. It was a huge station made of metal and glass, spinning slowly as it orbited the world below. Ships came and went every day, bringing students from all corners of the galaxy. The Academy was famous across hundreds of star systems as the best place to learn about alien life forms. Danny Carter stood at the window of his dorm room, watching the stars. He was 26 years old and the only human in the advanced xenobiology program. Getting accepted had been hard. Humans were new to the galactic community, having joined only 50 years ago. Most alien species still saw them as outsiders, barely worth noticing. The classroom building was a 10-minute walk through the connecting corridors. Danny grabbed his datapad and headed out. Other students moved past him in the halls. There were Vricks with their hard-shell bodies and multiple arms. There were tall Shen who looked like walking crystals. There were dozens of other species he was still learning to identify. Most of them ignored him. A few stared. Humans were rare here, and Danny had gotten used to being different. He didn't mind much. He was here to learn, not to make friends. The xenobiology classroom was large, with curved walls and adjustable seating for different body types. Professor Krell was already there arranging equipment at the front. The professor was a Vrix, standing about 5 feet tall with 6 arms and bright blue shell plating. His compound eyes could see in multiple directions at once. Danny took his usual seat near the middle of the room. Other students filed in slowly. There was Nexor, a Shen whose body chimed softly when he moved. There was Villith, a floating gas being contained in a clear suit. There were 24 others, all studying the complex science of alien biology. Professor Krell tapped one of his arms on the desk to get their attention. The room went quiet. "Today we have a special lesson," the professor said through his translator device. "You have all been studying predator species in theory. Now you will observe them in person." A ripple of excitement moved through the class. Krell's hands-on lessons were legendary, but they were also dangerous. Last month he had brought in toxic plants from a Category 7 world. 3 students had ended up in the medical bay. "The specimens arriving today are Velcaran shadowstalkers," Krell continued. "They are cubs only 3 months old, but already dangerous. Their homeworld is classified as Category 9. The room went very quiet. Category 9 meant a death world, a planet so hostile that most species couldn't survive there for more than a few hours. The creatures that evolved on such worlds were usually deadly. Danny leaned forward with interest. He had read about Velcarans in his studies. They were apex predators, meaning nothing on their world hunted them. They hunted everything else. Even the galactic military kept their distance from Velcara Prime. 2 security officers wheeled in 3 containment pods. Each pod was made of reinforced transparent material, with warning labels in 15 languages. Inside, Danny could see dark shapes moving. Several students immediately pushed their desks back from the center of the room. Nexor, the Shen student, actually stood up and moved toward the door. His crystalline body was flashing yellow, a sign of fear in his species. "There is no need for panic," Professor Krell said calmly. "Safety protocols are in place. Force fields will activate if the cubs show aggression. This is a controlled environment." Danny stayed where he was. He was curious, not scared. His datapad had files about Velcarans, but reading about something and seeing it were completely different. Professor Krell explained the rules. No sudden movements. No loud noises. Stay in your seats unless instructed otherwise. The cubs would be released for 30 minutes of observation. Students were to take notes on their behavior, movement patterns, and social interactions. The first pod opened with a hiss of air. The cub that emerged made Danny catch his breath. It was beautiful in a deadly way. Its body was covered in black scales that seemed to absorb light. 6 eyes glowed with a pale blue color, scanning the room with intelligence. It was about the size of a large earth dog, but moved with a grace that dogs never had. Every step was perfectly balanced, perfectly controlled. The second and third pods opened. 3 cubs now stood in the center of the classroom. They looked at each other, then began to explore their surroundings. Their movements were silent despite their size. Their tails, tipped with bony spikes, swayed behind them like deadly pendulums. Professor Krell began his lecture. He talked about Velcaran hunting strategies. He explained how their eyes could see in both visible and infrared spectrums. He described their jaw strength, their pack behavior, their role in their planet's ecosystem. The cubs prowled around the room's edge. One of them approached a Vrick student named Chisk. The student froze in terror. The cub sniffed the air, its lips pulling back to show rows of crystalline teeth. Then it lost interest and moved on. Danny watched everything carefully. The cubs were testing boundaries, learning about this new space. They were young, but their predatory instincts were already fully developed. Every movement had purpose. Every glance was calculating. Then one of the cubs stopped moving. Its head turned slowly toward Danny's side of the room. Its nostrils flared, taking in air. The other two cubs noticed and stopped their exploration as well. All three pairs of glowing eyes focused on the human. Danny felt his heart beat faster. He kept his breathing steady and his hands visible on his desk. Sudden movements would trigger a chase response. He had to stay calm. Danny Carter remained still, Professor Krell said. His manipulator arms were moving toward the emergency panel. Do not provoke them. The first cub began walking toward Danny. It moved slowly, head low, eyes locked on him. This was a hunting approach. Danny recognized it from his studies. The cub was treating him like potential prey. The other students were completely silent. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. The cub reached Danny's desk. It raised its head, bringing those 6 glowing eyes level with his face. They stared at each other for a long moment. Danny could see his reflection in those alien eyes. Then something unexpected happened. The cub's aggressive posture relaxed. Its tail stopped swaying. A sound came from deep in its chest, a low rumbling noise that filled the quiet room. Professor Krell's translator device made a confused beeping sound. The noise the cub was making didn't match any known Velcaran vocalization. The cub pressed its head against Danny's leg and rubbed against him like a cat. The rumbling sound grew louder. It was purring. Within seconds, all 3 cubs had abandoned their exploration. They gathered around Danny's desk like he was the most interesting thing in the room. One flopped down on top of his feet, its weight warm and heavy. Another tried to climb into his lap, its sharp claws catching on his clothes. The third simply leaned against his side, that strange purring noise vibrating through its entire body. Danny carefully reached down and touched the scales of the nearest cub. They were smooth and cool like polished stone. The cub pushed into his hand, clearly wanting more contact. Professor Krell stood frozen at the front of the classroom. His translator device was still beeping in confusion. Around the room, students stared with open shock. In 300 years of studying Velcarans, this had never happened. These were predators from a death world, creatures that knew only hunting and killing. They didn't show affection. They didn't purr. They certainly didn't curl up peacefully with alien species. But here they were, 3 deadly cubs swirled around a human's desk like contented pets. And Danny Carter, the only human in the academy, sat calmly in the middle of it all, wondering what he had just discovered. The news spread through the academy like wildfire. By the time Danny left the classroom, students from other programs were already talking about what happened. The human who made predators purr. The man who tamed Velcaran cubs without even trying. The story grew with each telling. Danny didn't feel like he had done anything special. He had just sat there while 3 alien creatures decided they liked him, but everyone else seemed to think it was impossible, and that made him nervous. Professor Krell called an emergency meeting with the science department. Danny found himself sitting in a conference room surrounded by some of the most brilliant minds in the galaxy. There were biologists, psychologists, behavioral specialists, and even security experts. All of them wanted answers he didn't have. "Describe exactly what you were thinking when the cubs approached," said Dr. Helen Pierce. She was the only other human on the academy staff, a comparative biology expert who had been studying alien life for 20 years. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes were sharp with scientific curiosity. "I wasn't thinking much of anything," Danny admitted. "I just tried to stay calm. I remembered reading that predators can sense fear, so I focused on keeping my breathing steady." "Did you make any gestures? Any sounds?" asked a Thelian scientist whose name Danny couldn't pronounce. "No, I just sat there." "And they responded with immediate affection," Professor Krell said, reviewing the footage from the classroom cameras. "This behavior has no precedent in Velcaran research. None." Dr. Pierce ran her scanner over Danny for the 5th time. She was measuring everything from his brain waves to his chemical signature. The readings all came back normal. He was, by every biological standard, an average human. "We need to run more tests," she announced. "But not here. The research wing has better equipment." The research wing was in the eastern section of the academy. Danny spent the next 3 days there, being poked and prodded by devices he didn't understand. They measured his pheromones, his electromagnetic field, his body temperature, his heart rate variability. They took blood samples, tissue samples, even samples of his breath. Nothing unusual showed up. Danny was completely ordinary. Meanwhile, Professor Krell was diving deep into historical records. He contacted Velcaran researchers across the galaxy, searching through centuries of data. The answer was always the same. Shadow stalkers didn't form bonds with other species. They were solitary hunters outside their own packs. The idea of them showing affection to an alien was absurd, yet the cubs kept proving everyone wrong. On the 4th day, they brought the cubs back for another test. Danny sat in an observation room while the 3 young Velcarans were released into an adjacent space. Cameras recorded everything. Without Danny present, the cubs were aggressive. They hissed at the scientists. They clawed at the walls. One of them tried to break through the transparent barrier. These were the behaviors everyone expected from Death World predators. Then they brought Danny into the room. The change was immediate and dramatic. All 3 cubs rushed toward him, their aggressive postures melting away. They crowded around his legs, making that strange purring sound. One rolled onto its back, exposing its vulnerable belly. In predator behavior, that was a sign of complete trust. "This is incredible," Helen whispered from the observation deck. "They recognize him specifically. Not just humans in general, but him as an individual." But that theory was about to be tested in an unexpected way. Lieutenant Chris Murphy arrived at the academy on the 5th day. He was a human combat specialist, sent by Earth's diplomatic corps to provide security assessment. He was tall and muscular, with short brown hair and the alert posture of someone trained for combat. He had volunteered to help with the research when he heard what was happening. "So you're the guy who made friends with the murder kittens," Chris said, shaking Danny's hand. His grip was firm and confident. "I didn't do anything," Danny said. "They just liked me for some reason." "Well, let's see if they like all humans or just you." The test was simple. Chris would enter the observation room alone, while the cubs were in their aggressive state. Cameras would record everything, and security was ready to activate force fields at the first sign of danger. Chris stepped into the room without hesitation. The 3 cubs turned toward him immediately. Danny watched from the observation deck, his stomach tight with worry. If the cubs attacked, it would be his fault for suggesting this test. The cubs approached slowly. Their body language was cautious but curious, not aggressive. Chris stood still, letting them investigate him. One cub sniffed his boots. Another circled around behind him. Then the 3rd cub made that purring sound. Within minutes, all 3 were showing the same affectionate behavior they had shown Danny. Chris knelt down, and they climbed on him like he was a playground. One tried to lick his face with a tongue that could strip flesh from bone. The observation deck erupted in excited conversation. Dr. Pierce was already running calculations on her datapad. Professor Krell's compound eyes were whirling in confusion. The implications were staggering. "It's not just Danny," Helen said. "It's humans. All humans." They spent the next week testing the theory with every human they could find. There were only 32 humans in the entire academy, counting staff and visiting personnel. Each one volunteered for the tests. The results were consistent. Every single human produced the same effect on the Velcaran cubs. Some humans were more effective than others, but all of them could calm the predators to some degree. Then they expanded the tests to other predator species. The Academy had samples from dozens of dangerous worlds. They brought in Raytheon serpents whose venom could kill most species in seconds. They brought in Kilrathi hunters, territorial pack predators known for their aggression. They even brought in a juvenile specimen from a species so dangerous that its name was classified. Every predator responded to human presence with reduced aggression. The effect was strongest with apex predators from death worlds, but it worked across the board. Some creatures that had been kept in isolation for years because they were too dangerous to handle became manageable when humans were present. The scientific community was in chaos. Research papers were being written at a frantic pace. Theories were proposed and debunked daily. Everyone wanted to understand the mechanism behind this phenomenon. Dr. Pierce worked around the clock, comparing human biology to that of other species. She brought in xenopsychologists, evolutionary biologists, and even historians. The answer had to be somewhere in the data. Danny continued his regular classes, but now he was also spending hours in the research wing. The 3 Velcarin cubs had become his constant companions. The academy staff had given up trying to separate them. Wherever Danny went, the cubs followed. They slept under his desk during lectures. They waited outside the cafeteria while he ate. They even tried to follow him into the bathroom until security put a stop to it. Other students gradually got used to seeing the deadly predators walking freely through the halls. The cubs were harmless as long as Danny was nearby. If he left, they became agitated and aggressive until he returned. "You've essentially adopted 3 of the galaxy's most dangerous predators," Chris said one evening. He and Danny had become friends during the testing. They were sitting in the common area, watching the cubs play with a piece of equipment they had stolen from somewhere. "I didn't adopt them," Danny protested. "They adopted me. Either way, you're now responsible for 3 creatures that will grow up to be 9 feet long and capable of killing a Shen with 1 bite. Danny hadn't thought about that. The cubs were growing fast. In just 2 weeks, they had already gained several pounds each. Eventually, they would be massive predators, and they seemed to think he was their pack leader. "We'll figure something out," Danny said, though he wasn't sure what. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young Vrix researcher named Scholar Threx was reviewing Earth's evolutionary history when she noticed something odd. She brought her findings to Dr. Pierce late one night. "Earth is unusual," Threx said, her translator device making her clicking language into standard galactic speech. "Most species evolve as either predators or prey. Humans evolved as both." Helen looked up from her microscope. "What do you mean?" "Your ancestors were hunted by predators for millions of years. Big cats, wolves, bears. But humans also hunted. They developed tools and strategies to kill creatures much larger than themselves. They lived alongside predators in a way most species never did. Persistence hunting," Helen said, the pieces starting to fit together. "We didn't outrun our prey. We chased them until they collapsed from exhaustion. Yes, but more importantly, you domesticated predators. You turned wolves into dogs. You made companions out of creatures that should have been your enemies. No other species in the galaxy has done this." Helen felt a chill run down her spine. "It's in our evolutionary history. We evolved to communicate with predators on an instinctive level. And perhaps your biology reflects that. Your pheromones, your body language. Something about you triggers a recognition response in predatory species. They sense that you understand them." The theory was revolutionary. If true, it meant humans had a unique place in the galactic ecosystem. They weren't the strongest species or the smartest, but they might be the only ones who could bridge the gap between civilization and the wild predators that the Galactic Council met in emergency session 3 weeks after the discovery. Representatives from 200 member species gathered on the neutral station above Kepler 442b. The chamber was enormous, with translation devices creating a constant hum of overlapping voices. Danny watched the proceedings from a visitor's gallery. He felt small and out of place. Down on the main floor, ambassadors were arguing about what his species meant for the galaxy. Some saw opportunity, others saw threat. A few seemed genuinely afraid. Ambassador Chen represented Earth in the council. She was a small woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She stood at the human delegation's podium, waiting for her turn to speak. "The evidence is clear," said Ambassador Vrel of the Vrix Collective. His translator made his clicking sound formal and cold. "Humans possess an ability that no other species has demonstrated. They can pacify predatory life forms through mere presence. This has implications for exploration, colonization, and military applications. It also raises questions about human nature," added Counselor Thesh, a Thelian whose species valued caution above all else. "Why would evolution produce such an ability unless humans themselves were extremely dangerous? Perhaps they are predators pretending to be civilized." Danny felt his face flush with anger. He wasn't a predator. He was just a student who happened to be good with animals. Ambassador Chen's voice cut through the murmuring. "Counselor Thesh raises an interesting point, though perhaps not the one he intended. Yes, humans evolved as hunters. So did the Kilrathi. So did the Vrix before your species developed agriculture. The difference is that humans also learned to live with predators, not just hunt them or flee from them." She activated a holographic display. Images of Earth appeared above the council floor. dogs playing with human children, cats sleeping on laps, horses carrying riders, falcons hunting alongside their handlers. We call it domestication, Chen continued. For thousands of years, humans have formed partnerships with predatory species. We didn't destroy them or lock them away. We learned their language, earned their trust, and built relationships. This ability is not a weapon. It is a bridge. The council chamber filled with debate. Some species saw the logic in Chen's words. Others remained suspicious. The discussion went on for hours with no clear resolution. Meanwhile, back at the academy, the research continued. Dr. Pierce had assembled a team of scientists from a dozen species. They were trying to isolate exactly what made humans special. Blood chemistry, pheromone signatures, electromagnetic fields, every possible biological factor was being studied. Danny spent his days as a test subject and his nights studying for exams. The 3 Velkaran cubs, who he had unofficially named Shadow, Midnight, and Dusk, were growing rapidly. They were now the size of large wolves, their scales darkening to a deeper black. Their purring had gotten louder, vibrating through the floor whenever they were content. Chris Murphy had become a permanent fixture at the academy. The military wanted detailed reports on human-predator interactions. Chris volunteered to be the primary test subject for the more dangerous specimens. "You're insane," Danny told him after watching Chris hand-feed a Raytheon serpent whose venom could kill in 30 seconds. "Probably." Chris agreed, checking his arm where the serpent had wrapped around him affectionately. "But someone has to do it. Might as well be me." The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Dr. Pierce was reviewing brain scans when she noticed something odd. When humans were near predators, a specific region of their brain showed unusual activity. It was an area associated with empathy and social bonding. "We're reading them," Helen explained to Danny and Chris in her lab. "Not with words or conscious thought, but on an instinctive level. Your brain is processing the predator's body language, chemical signals, and behavioral cues, then responding appropriately. It happens so fast you don't even realize you're doing it." "Like how people can tell when a dog is about to bite?" Danny asked. "Exactly, but much more sophisticated. You're not just reading aggression or fear. You're understanding complex emotional states and responding in ways that communicate safety and acceptance. The predators sense this understanding and respond to it." "So we're speaking their language without knowing we're speaking," Chris said. "In a way, yes. And because humans co-evolved with predators on Earth, this ability works across species. The fundamental patterns of predatory behavior are similar throughout the galaxy." The research made waves in the scientific community. Papers were published. Theories were refined. The Academy became the center of a new field of study called interspecies behavioral linguistics. But not everyone was happy about the discoveries. There were species in the galaxy who had lost entire colonies to predatory wildlife. Worlds that had been abandoned because the native creatures were too dangerous. Resources that couldn't be harvested because approaching them meant certain death. Admiral Kresh of the Galactic Defense Fleet saw the military applications immediately. He arrived at the academy with a full security detail and a list of proposals. He was a Kandor, a species that looked like walking tanks with their armored hides and powerful builds. "Your species could change everything," Kresh told Danny during a private meeting. "There are 53 Category 9 worlds in explored space. All of them are rich in resources but impossible to settle because of their predatory ecosystems. With humans, we could establish bases, extract resources, conduct research." "You want us to be bait?" Chris said flatly. He had insisted on attending the meeting. "I want you to be pioneers," Kresh corrected. "Well-paid pioneers. Earth's economy could benefit greatly from such arrangements." Danny didn't like where this was going. "What about the predators? What happens to them if humans help you colonize their worlds?" "They would be managed. Relocated if necessary. Standard colonization protocols." "Managed means killed," Chris said. "And relocated means driven to extinction." Kresh's face, if you could call it that, showed no emotion. The needs of civilization must come first. These are animals, not citizens. The meeting ended badly. Danny and Chris left feeling sick. The Admiral's attitude was shared by many in the galactic government. They saw predators as obstacles to be removed, not as intelligent beings with their own rights. That night, Danny sat in his dorm room with Shadow curled up at his feet. The cub was getting big, already over 100 pounds. In a few months, it would be a fully grown predator capable of incredible violence, but right now it was just sleeping peacefully, trusting him completely. "What are we going to do?" Danny asked aloud. Chris, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. "We're going to make sure they can't use us the way Kresh wants. If humans have this ability, we need to control how it's used. How do we do that?" We get ahead of the story. We show the galaxy that predators aren't just resources to be exploited. We prove they're intelligent, valuable, worth protecting. It was easier said than done. But over the next few weeks, Danny and Chris worked with Dr. Pierce and Professor Krell to document everything they were learning. They recorded hours of footage showing complex behaviors in predatory species that had previously been considered mindless killers. The Velkaran cubs demonstrated problem-solving abilities. They worked together to overcome obstacles. They showed emotional responses that went beyond simple instinct. With human handlers present, they were calm enough to be properly studied for the first time. Other predator species showed similar results. Rathian serpents had complex communication systems. Kilrathi hunters had social structures as sophisticated as any civilized species. Even the classified specimen, which turned out to be a xenomorphic juvenile, showed signs of intelligence when not consumed by aggression. "They're not monsters," Helen said during a presentation to the Galactic Council. "They're people. Different from us, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But sentient beings with their own cultures and societies. We've been treating them as obstacles because we couldn't communicate with them. Humans can change that." The council was divided. Some members saw the value in what Helen was proposing. Others remained skeptical. The debate raged on. Meanwhile, word was spreading through unofficial channels. There were species in the galaxy who had been pushed off their homeworlds by predators. Refugees living on crowded stations because their planets were too dangerous to inhabit. They heard about humans and saw hope. Maybe they could reclaim their worlds without exterminating the creatures that had driven them away. Requests started coming in. Colony governors wanted human consultants. Research stations wanted human handlers. Military units wanted human specialists for dangerous missions. Earth's government was overwhelmed with offers, contracts, and proposals. Ambassador Chen saw the danger. If humans weren't careful, they could end up as tools for other species' agendas. They needed to establish guidelines, ethics, and boundaries. "We need trained specialists," she announced during a meeting with Earth's government. "People who understand both the science and the ethics. Who can work with predatory species without exploiting them. Like a new field of study," Danny suggested. He was attending the meeting via holographic projection from the Academos Species FA. The Interspecies Integration Initiative started with 20 students in a converted research wing of the Academy. Danny was student number 1, officially enrolled and attending classes while still helping with ongoing research. Chris was number 2. The rest came from Earth over the following months, each one carefully selected for their aptitude and attitude toward alien life. The program was intense. Students learned xenobiology, comparative psychology, behavioral linguistics, and field survival skills. They studied the evolutionary history of predatory species across the galaxy. They learned to read body language in creatures that didn't have bodies like anything on Earth. They practiced remaining calm under pressure because panic around a predator could be fatal. Dr. Pierce headed the academic side of the program. She was a demanding teacher, expecting perfect understanding of every concept. Her lectures covered everything from pheromone communication to the social structures of pack hunters. She had no patience for students who saw predators as pets or tools rather than intelligent beings deserving respect. Professor Krell taught the practical courses. Under his guidance, students worked with live specimens in controlled environments. They started with small, relatively safe predators and gradually worked up to more dangerous species. Each interaction was carefully monitored with safety protocols ready to activate at a moment's notice. Chris excelled at the physical challenges. He could remain perfectly still while a Kilrathi hunter circled him, reading every tiny shift in the predator's posture. He had an instinct for when to advance and when to retreat, when to make eye contact and when to look away. Other students studied his technique, trying to replicate his natural ability. Danny's strength was different. He could spend hours observing a single predator, noting patterns that others missed. He saw the small behaviors that indicated mood, intention, and personality. He understood that each predator was an individual, not just a representative of its species. The three Velkaran cubs, now approaching their full size, served as teaching aides and test subjects. Shadow, Midnight, and Dusk had bonded with several other students, though Danny remained their primary attachment figure. They demonstrated social behaviors that researchers had never documented before, because previous attempts to study Velkarans always ended in violence. "They're playing," Danny explained to a group of new students one afternoon. The three cubs were engaged in what looked like a fight, rolling and tumbling across the observation room floor. "See how they're careful with their claws? How they take turns being dominant? This is how they learn hunting techniques and establish pack hierarchy." One of the new students, a young woman named Katie Brooks, raised her hand. "But they're already bigger than we are. Isn't it dangerous to have them loose like this?" "It would be dangerous for most species," Danny admitted, "but they recognize us as pack members. As long as we respect their social cues and don't challenge their status, they see us as allies rather than prey or rivals." The cubs had indeed grown enormous. Shadow, the largest, was now over 300 pounds of pure muscle wrapped in armor-like scales. His jaws could crush steel. His claws could tear through most materials. But when Danny approached, the massive predator rolled onto his back like a puppy asking for belly rubs. The contrast never stopped being surreal. These were the same species that had killed dozens of researchers on their homeworld. Yet here they were, gentle and playful with the humans they trusted. Not every species in the academy understood or approved. There were still students who gave Danny and his classmates a wide berth in the hallways. Some professors openly questioned whether the program was safe. A few advocated for shutting it down entirely. The skeptics got ammunition when an incident occurred during the third month of training. A student named Greg Norton was working with a Raytheon serpent when something went wrong. The serpent, normally calm around humans, suddenly struck. Greg barely dodged, and the serpent's venomous fangs scraped his arm. He survived, thanks to immediate medical intervention, but he quit the program the next day. The incident made headlines across the galactic news networks. Human predator specialist nearly killed. Was the program too dangerous? Were humans overconfident in their abilities? An investigation revealed what went wrong. Greg had been sick that day, running a fever. His chemical signature was different enough that the serpent didn't recognize him as safe. It was a valuable lesson about the limitations of human-predator bonding, but it came at a painful cost. Dr. Pierce added new protocols. Students had to pass health scans before working with predators. They learned to recognize when their own condition might affect their safety. The program became more rigorous, not less. Despite the setback, applications kept coming. Earth's government had to establish a lottery system because they couldn't accept everyone who wanted to join. The idea of working with alien predators captured imaginations across humanity. Some applicants wanted adventure. Others saw it as a way to help species that had been misunderstood. A few just loved animals and saw this as the ultimate challenge. Danny's research continued alongside his coursework. He was documenting Velkaran social behavior, communication patterns, and cognitive abilities. His findings were revolutionary. Shadow, Midnight, and Dusk could solve complex puzzles, understand cause and effect, and even showed evidence of planning future actions. "They're not mindless killers," Danny wrote in his research notes. "They're apex predators with intelligence comparable to Earth's great apes. They have emotions, preferences, and personalities. The only reason we didn't know this before is because we couldn't get close enough to study them properly." His thesis was taking shape. If Velkarans were intelligent, they deserved protection under galactic law. Their homeworld shouldn't be opened for colonization or resource extraction. It should be designated as a protected habitat, with research conducted respectfully rather than exploitatively. Not everyone agreed with his position. There were powerful interests in the galaxy who saw Category 9 worlds as untapped resources: minerals, exotic compounds, potential pharmaceutical sources. These worlds were worth trillions of credits, and humans were the key to accessing them safely. A corporate delegation visited the academy, offering funding for the program in exchange for priority access to human specialists. Danny sat in on the meeting, listening to executives talk about predators like they were obstacles to profit rather than living beings. "We're not interested," Ambassador Chen said firmly. She had traveled to the Academy specifically for this meeting. The Interspecies Integration Initiative is not a staffing agency for your mining operations. "We're offering very generous terms," the lead executive insisted. He was a Kandor, the same species as Admiral Kresh. "Earth's economy could benefit tremendously." "Earth's economy will benefit from doing this right," Chen replied. "We're not going to compromise the ethics of this program for short-term profit. Human specialists will work with predators to study and protect them, not to help you strip mine their worlds." The meeting ended without an agreement. The corporate delegation left unsatisfied, but Chen had made her position clear. Earth would control how its citizens' unique abilities were used. That decision had consequences. Some galactic powers began looking for alternatives to human specialists. There were rumors of genetic research trying to replicate the human ability in other species. There were reports of military programs attempting to use technology to pacify predators. None of these efforts were successful, but the attempts continued. Meanwhile, the first class of predator specialists was approaching graduation. 20 students had started the program, 15 remained. The others had dropped out due to the physical demands, the danger, or simply realizing this wasn't the career they wanted. The final exam was designed to test everything they had learned. Each student would spend 24 hours on a small moon that had been terraformed to support various predator species. They would have to navigate the environment, interact with the wildlife, and complete a series of objectives without getting killed. Danny's exam site included a pack of juvenile Kilrathi hunters, several Rathian serpents, and a lone Velkaran adult that had been rescued from an illegal zoo. The Velkaran was older, scarred from abuse, and had never been properly socialized. It was one of the most dangerous creatures Danny would ever face. Chris got an even harder assignment. His test included a xenomorphic specimen that was considered too dangerous to be kept at the Academy permanently. It had been transported from a military research facility specifically for this exam. "Good luck," Danny told Chris the night before the test. "Try not to get killed." "Same to you," Chris replied with a grin. "Though if you die, I get to keep your notes." "That's not how it works." "Worth a try." The humor was forced. They both knew how dangerous this exam would be. People had died working with predators, even with all the precautions and training. This test was designed to push them to their limits. The next morning, Danny was dropped on the moon's surface with nothing but basic survival gear and his knowledge. The transport ship lifted off immediately, leaving him alone in an alien landscape under a purple sky. He could hear howling in the distance. The Kilrathi pack knew he was. Here, they would come to investigate. He had minutes, maybe less, to prepare. Danny found a defensible position near some rocks and waited. His heart was pounding. The Velkaran adult found Danny 6 hours into his exam. He was resting near a stream. The Kilrathi pack sprawled around him in the afternoon sun. They had accepted him completely, treating him like a harmless oddity that smelled interesting but posed no threat. Then the forest went silent. The Kilrathi lifted their heads, ears swiveling. They smelled something that made them nervous. One by one, they slipped away into the undergrowth, abandoning Danny without hesitation. Whatever was coming scared them more than their curiosity about the strange human. Danny stood slowly, scanning the tree line. He knew what was out there. The Velkaran adult. The final and most dangerous part of his exam. This wasn't a cub he had raised from infancy. This was a fully grown predator with a history of violence and abuse. It had killed before. It might kill again. The creature emerged from the shadows like liquid darkness. It was massive, easily twice the size of shadow, midnight, or dusk. Scars crisscrossed its scales, telling stories of fights and suffering. Its 6 eyes glowed with an intelligence that was both familiar and alien. This was no mindless beast. This was a thinking, feeling being who had learned to hate. Danny's training kicked in. He didn't run. Running triggered chase instincts. He didn't make direct eye contact. That was a challenge. He stood at an angle, shoulders relaxed, breathing steady. He projected calm despite the fear coursing through his veins. The Velkaran approached slowly, testing him. Its body language was different from the cub's. More controlled. More dangerous. This creature had learned not to trust easily. It had been hurt too many times. Danny spoke softly, not expecting the Velcaran to understand words, but using his voice to convey tone. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe now." The Velcaran circled him, staying just out of reach. Danny could feel those 6 eyes analyzing every movement, every breath. He was being evaluated as either threat or prey. His next actions would determine which. He slowly lowered himself to the ground, making himself smaller and less threatening. It was a risk. Being on the ground made him more vulnerable, but it also showed he wasn't preparing to fight or flee. He was offering trust. Long minutes passed. The Velcaran continued its careful circle. Then gradually its posture changed. The aggressive tension in its muscles eased slightly. Its tail, which had been raised and ready to strike, lowered a fraction. Danny remained still, barely breathing. This was the critical moment. The creature was deciding whether to attack or engage. The Velcaran took a step closer, then another. It lowered its massive head, bringing those glowing eyes level with Danny's face. They stared at each other across the vast divide of species and experience. Then the Velcaran did something Danny didn't expect. A sound emerged from deep in its chest, broken and uncertain, but unmistakable. It was trying to purr. The sound was rough, unpracticed, as if the creature had forgotten how. But it was there. Danny slowly reached out his hand. The Velcaran flinched but didn't retreat. When his fingers touched those scarred scales, the creature's eyes closed. It leaned into the contact like it was starving for kindness. "You've had a hard life," Danny said softly. "But it's over now. No one's going to hurt you anymore." He sat with the Velcaran for hours, just offering quiet companionship. The creature eventually lay down beside him, its massive head resting near his lap. The broken purring continued, gradually becoming smoother and more natural. When the transport ship returned to collect Danny at the end of the exam period, they found him asleep, leaning against the side of a creature that could have killed him in seconds. The Velcaran was curled protectively around him, one massive paw resting across his legs. The exam footage went viral across the galactic networks. A human, unarmed and alone, befriending a creature that had been classified as unmanageable and dangerous. The images challenged every assumption about predators, about humans, and about what was possible. All 15 students passed their final exams. Some did better than others, but each one proved they understood what they had been taught. They could work with predators safely, ethically, and effectively. The graduation ceremony was held in the Academy's main auditorium. Representatives from across the galaxy attended. Ambassador Chen gave the keynote speech, talking about responsibility and opportunity. Dr. Pierce presented each graduate with their certification. Professor Krell, in a rare display of emotion, told them he was proud of what they had accomplished. Danny graduated at the top of his class. His thesis, Velcaran Intelligence and Social Behavior, was immediately published in the Journal of Xenobiology. It won awards and changed how the scientific community viewed Category 9 predators. But the real work was just beginning. Danny's graduation project was approved by both the Academy and the Galactic Council. He would lead an expedition to Velcara Prime, establishing the first permanent research station on the Predator homeworld. It was dangerous, ambitious, and exactly what he wanted to do. The expedition team included Chris, who volunteered immediately, and 6 other graduates from the program. They brought minimal equipment, relying on their skills rather than technology. The plan was simple. Land on Velcara Prime, make contact with the local predator population, and prove that humans could coexist with even the deadliest species. The landing was tense. The ship touched down in a clearing near the equator, in territory known to be dense with shadowstalker populations. Previous expeditions had never made it past the first night. Attack patterns from the native Velcarans were fast and brutal. Danny was the first to exit the ship. Shadow, Midnight, and Dusk came with him. The 3 cubs, now adults themselves, were returning home for the first time since they had been taken as specimens. They would serve as ambassadors between humans and their own species. Within hours, wild Velcarans began appearing. They came cautiously, drawn by the scent of their own kind. The 3 raised by humans Velcarans greeted their wild cousins with elaborate displays that Danny had documented extensively. Body language, scent marking, vocalizations. It was a complex dance of introduction and acceptance. And because the wild Velcarans accepted Shadow, Midnight, and Dusk, they also accepted the humans. not as prey, not as threats, as pack members. Over the following weeks, the research station took shape. It was built with help from the local predators, who seemed curious about the construction. Velkarans brought food as gifts. They led the humans to water sources. They even warned the team about dangerous areas by physically blocking paths. The data Danny collected was revolutionary. Velkarans had complex language, advanced problem-solving abilities, and social structures that rivaled any civilized species. They told stories through scent and sound, passing knowledge between generations. They had culture, art, and traditions. They're people, Danny reported to Dr. Pierce via comlink. Not animals, not monsters, people who happened to be apex predators. The recordings from Velkara Prime changed the galactic conversation. Species that had advocated for colonizing death worlds began to reconsider. If the predators were intelligent and capable of communication, did that change their rights? Could you ethically strip mine a world inhabited by sentient beings? The Galactic Council established new guidelines. Category 9 worlds would be protected unless their intelligent inhabitants consented to contact. Human predator specialists would serve as intermediaries, but only if both parties agreed. No forced colonization. No exploitation without consent. It wasn't a perfect solution. There were still corporations trying to find loopholes. There were still politicians arguing for resource access. But it was a start. More humans joined the program. The second class was larger than the first. The third was larger still. Within 2 years, there were human predator specialists working across the galaxy. They established research stations on death worlds. They negotiated with predatory species about peaceful contact. They advocated for protections and rights. Some specialists focused on rescue work, helping rehabilitate abused or displaced predators. Others worked in education, teaching the galaxy about species they had feared for centuries. A few became ambassadors, representing predatory species in the Galactic Council. Chris led a team that successfully relocated a population of endangered Kilrathi hunters. Their homeworld had been damaged by mining operations before the new protections were in place. The species was dying out. Chris worked with them for 8 months, earning trust, learning their needs. Then he helped them establish a new colony on a protected world where they could thrive. Katie Brooks, who had been nervous during training, became one of the best specialists in the program. She worked with Raytheon serpents, documenting their intelligence and advocating for their conservation. Her research proved they communicated through a combination of chemical signals and body language, so subtle that most species couldn't detect it. Back at the academy, Professor Krell's xenobiology class continued. But now it started differently. Instead of containment pods and safety protocols, 3 Velkaran cubs would enter the classroom freely. They would explore, play, and interact with students who no longer feared them. And at the end of each class, those cubs would make their way to wherever Danny Carter sat. They woo,